At the end of the day, you have to execute, and it's not very fun or pretty or sexy at first, right? It's really that concept of rolling up your sleeves and getting it done. I had no background in advertising, but at the end of the day, that's what I was selling. And so it would be, okay, well, hey, here, this is this.
Welcome to Agency Acquisitions and Exits. I'm your host, Peter Lang. Today, we welcome Judah Longgrear. He went from idea to exit, and he thinks of acquisitions the right way as the mechanism to achieve the thing that you want within your business, not as some talisman of selling and sitting on a beach somewhere. He's going to give you the advice he wished he had before he jumped into negotiations for his potential deal. So let's dive in. Judah, gotta give us the backstory. What led to your company and what led to your potential exit?
Yeah, happy to. Well, what we started with is certainly not what ended up happening, which I think is true with a lot of entrepreneurs and, startups is, you have an idea of what the market wants, and that really is an idea of what you think the market wants. But, I highly encourage you to understand that, well, my advice, unsolicited advice, would be listen to what the market wants, make tweaks, and adjust based off of the feedback. And so, what we started back, what I started back in 2017, when I really kind of went all in on the startup world, and I had previous experience in corporate America, right? So can attest to those who are tempted to start their own thing, but kind of get entrapped by the security that comes with things such as benefits. But back in 2017, had a concept for uh, creating a rideshare company that was paid for purely by advertising. So it was 100% electric. These low speed electric vehicles that would drive within like a 3 mile radius of these downtown areas that are highly populated. We would go out and sell advertising. Keep saying we, it was just a one-man band at this point, but we did grow eventually. But go out and sell this concept, right? Hey, these are the vehicles that I'm getting. Would you like to sponsor by paying a monthly subscription for the panel, and then we'll drop people off at your location, but if nothing else, you'll get visibility. So did that, and launched the first city in 2017 in downtown Fort Myers, and that's how it began.
So you took this idea, which you had shared comes from kind of this opportunity, this gap in the marketplace, and you had to sell. You had to sell to the people who would become your inventory, the idea of how this could work. You had to sell it to the local businesses who would advertise. And then you're creating sales material, marketing material,
Sure.
advertisements. Uh, you became kind of a bridge between the consumer and the businesses around, which was near and dear to my heart. I started a company right out of university, similar intention in this display advertising category, not in rideshare at all.
Sure.
But it turned me into kind of this service provider where I had to come up with creative, I had to come up with the things that made me look good and the companies that were advertising look good. So unpack that a little bit. How did you start, being an entrepreneur, doing this creative advertising channel? And what were the component parts and how did you build that team?
Yeah. That's great to hear your backstory. You definitely, feel like you can probably uh attest to some of the pain points that come with that, right? Because you kind of are forced to solve for a few problems when you're in that space. But to answer your question, how it started really was like the concept like came about because I would see similar types of transportation happening, but never like on a like corporate scale or on like any type of tech enabled way, right? It would be someone who's giving someone a ride on a back with loud music playing, and you might see like an ad for a pizza location or whatever the ad might be. and people were using it, right? And they were giving them tips. And so, in the Florida, it's kind of the Florida vibe. You have those in a lot of downtown areas. And the concept was like, man, if you could turn this into like a structured business that really worked in a way that was pragmatic and operated efficiently, and that was kind of the like the long vision. But in the short term, right, it's like you can have a long vision and it's important, right, to have the North Star, but at the end of the day, you have to execute, and it's not very fun or pretty or sexy at first, right? It's really that concept of, rolling up your sleeves and getting it done. So I think a lot of it was like I didn't really quite know all what it was entailed because I had no background in advertising. But at the end of the day, that's what I was selling. And so it would be, okay, well, hey, here, this is this. Okay, oh, now we need to get specs. We need to get them to be able to be printed on laminate to install them on the vehicles. How does that work? So you reach out to the installer and you say, oh, okay, it needs to be in this, like in this shape, in this format, and then I'd hire someone. I was a big believer in Upwork. That was a great platform. Shout out to like those freelance platforms that allow you to start stuff without having to spend a ton of money or having to hire full-time employees at first, because you're really just validating the concept. And so there was those trusted like contractors that I would work with, and you really just have to take it step by step. And from there, you start to realize the importance of creative, right? Because again, it was like, oh, well, maybe I'll just have the brands do all the creative, and they would just, send me
That
a perfectly
that
established.
local deli shop or pizza shop, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Yeah,
like
you all of a sudden,
here's what we put in our menus. You're like, this isn't going to work.
yeah, it's like, 1,000 words, size 7 font. You're like, maybe less is more. I don't know. Like, let's get a picture of your juicy hamburger. So, learn through that process, because again, it was not just representing their brand, but it was also representing our brand. And we wanted it to be aesthetically pleasing, because we were, a billboard on wheels. And there were some other pieces to it that probably made it a lot more complicated than what your business did. So I think your idea probably would have won out in a competition if I had to guess.
Well, I had the problem of doing video production. So
Yeah.
I secured inventory in hotels, that hotel room channel. And, you go to these, I had no creative team, no agency at the time. And it was that same thing, knock on the door and say, hey, I have this amazing placement compared to all these other options. I don't have a media team. I don't have a creative team. So you give me the stuff that I can put on this to promote you. And then I look at it and go, this isn't going to make it look very good.
Yeah.
It has to be worth someone seeing and build the brand and be attractive. And it was just opening the doors to us becoming a creative company, because we were running our own advertising.
Yeah.
And hiring people to do the creative, working with the dimensions or limitations of that.
Yeah.
And then we had to go on locations. We went even further and help them do production for us that could be localized. It went far for us,
Yeah.
which it sounds like you avoided. But
I guess there was trade-offs, right? We both, you can pick apart each one on kind of which one was more challenging. I still think your idea was better, but hey,
uh,
debate
well,
that.
I didn't get to where you got. So you took this idea of we're going to attach ourselves to like a hyper local, uh, you know, ride share advertising billboard type approach.
Yeah,
You are then partnering and selling to local businesses, so competing for the eyeballs of the people within these really dense populations. And then
sure.
you became this quasi ad company slash creative advertising entity, and then you bolted on analytics.
Yeah, yeah,
So this is what a lot of people don't realize is an opportunity for them, is the data you're collecting through these advertisements, through your client relationships and who you're helping, is often more valuable
sure.
than the placement itself.
Yeah,
So when did you make that transition from like advertising, a on moving billboard to analytics, to the data?
yeah, yeah. It was certainly, I would say, I would like to think it was a calculated kind of decision, right? But I think it kind of naturally gravitated towards that because what happened was we actually were able to sell that inventory just because it was like such a novelty, right? And the people were actually getting moved around. And so brands would see it and then they were actually like riding in it as well. So they were going across town, they'd pick up the ride, and then they'd be talking to other people. So it kind of became this like self-fulfilling prophecy. And there would be a lot of like inbound leads that we would get. And that's obviously a great thing when you're building something is to have that early validation, like, hey, there is a need for this, or there is a potential uh market for this. And then we got approached by, and so one city's like one thing, right? So you're running that 7 days a week, 3 to 5 vehicles at the time. And it's definitely busy, but it's manageable. And then we got approached by the neighboring city and they said, we love the concept. Can you bring it here? And of course, you can salespeople and entrepreneurs, we can do anything. So
We say yes before we even thought what it's going to
yeah,
look like.
exactly, exactly. And the cool thing about this was then being able to have the city support. So the worked very closely with the city council, not city council, but like the local um governments that kind of has like the small business groups, kind of all the major players in those cities. There's a term for it, I can't think of it at the moment, but
CVB.
that might be it. And was able to present the idea and was able to even pre-sell inventory before launching the city. So now we're awesome, right? Because we
That's
have
the
the
best selling.
that's the best. I like that selling because before we invested in the fleet, where I had my one investor, I said, hey, listen, and now I have free inventory because at first he invested and I had to go out and sell the inventory. So it was a little bit of the chicken and the egg. This way it was we had the egg before the chicken at the second time. And during that process, our operations became extremely difficult because it basically doubled the load, right? So it was like, okay, well, taking a step back, you know, I'm young, I'm ambitious, I can do anything. Let's really turn this into like a massive company, right? That was kind of how I was looking at it. And to do that, you were seeing the trends that were happening with rideshare providers like Uber and Lyft. And I had come from a, pretty like data centric background working at companies like Salesforce and NetApp. And then I brought on a CTO, which was probably one of the smartest things I could do. A really good, smart guy that I met at a local startup, had background in hardware engineering. And like he went all in on the data piece of it. And I kind of explained what like I think would be great to have. And then from there, I think what's really encouraging about entrepreneurship and building things is like you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, nor have I ever been. But if you're willing to take that action, put yourself out there and tell like not even tell a story, show a story, that's going to get people like excited because they want to be part of change, right? I mean, I think that's in human nature. And so I was able to get a lot of really local quality talent for a very low cost. And for the dream of equity, or not the dream, but for equity, right? And the of what could be. And so he came on board, and then we started to double down on this internal tech platform called Nicolytics. Because what would happen was now we started getting larger contracts, but the advertisers wanted to see how many hours were we on the road. Okay. How do we kind of do the proof of performance? Um, the phone number that we call and use in dispatching all of a sudden became not it became too much when you now had 10 vehicles running 7 days a week. We needed to develop a mobile app. So we developed a mobile app similar to like an Uber app where you get live updates where the drivers are at, picked up and ride and stuff. And so it was kind of a natural progression of the needs of the business. To me, I'm a big believer that like business, you solve for technology, help solve for the business problem. Don't build technology for technology's sake. Um, but the analytics was a really interesting, eye-opening thing because we then started to see kind of all that was missing in that space of out of home advertising. Um, Fast forward, um, we actually grew that business to 5 cities, and got to the largest point. I think we had 35 vehicles going 7 days a week. Um, and certainly had a lot of challenges because ultimately we were running two businesses. We had the pure ad tech business internally called Nicolytics, which had its own challenges and opportunities, but really interesting, like I would say growth opportunities. And then the second one was this rideshare business of moving humans around, which is very capital intensive and very operationally heavy. And so we had to make a decision.
Yeah. The heavy thing or the light thing?
You got to decide, right? And so it was interesting too, right? Because you have these signs of like, oh, like you're being validated, right? Because you're having customers and you're getting more cities and more. I mean, it wasn't from a lack of interest. It was from a lack of like you need to pay the bills to keep everything moving, and it's becoming more capital intensive. And so we were talking to some, larger investors now. At first, it was more just angel investors, and then it got into like venture capitalists. And you're having these conversations, but at the same time, Uber and Lyft had just gone public, and then the financials were not beautiful. Let's just say that, and it quickly changed the dynamic. And I remember sitting there with about a month left of burn, and on the outside, everything looked amazing, right? We would get all kinds of news coverage, PR, doing all this great, reducing emissions, uh, decongesting parking, helping local businesses, and employing drivers. But really, you're sitting there under like a ball of stress because you're like, this could all fall apart because if the funding doesn't come through, you're not going to be able to continue that operation. So we remember over July 4th weekend, it was a pretty somber time, right? A lot of people were celebrating. Had to look at the data, right? And kind of look at the trends of what was happening and realize that the real value that we had was in the ad tech advertising technology and the data and the measurement and the everything that goes with that, right? Which is essentially an agency of sorts, but agency slash ad tech. And so we pivoted um, on July 5th, 2019, from Nickel Ride to Nicolytics, and started to build a business back up from scratch.
Uh, the journey of a business, as it evolves and as the market dictates its change, is not boring. That's for sure, right?
Not
It's
boring.
definitely not boring, and is
Not
incredibly
boring
stressful.
and stressful. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of doubts, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's either option was a risk. You just have to take, as much of a calculated risk as possible and, really look long term, right? Not just what the short
Yeah.
term looks like, but what does this look like in the next, 3 to 5 years? And, ultimately we made that decision and I think it worked out pretty well.
Well, most businesses don't think about growth properly. Or they don't think about how an exit fuels growth. They have this vision of I sold the business, I'm sitting on a beach somewhere,
Yep.
versus a transaction is a means to accomplish a new threshold of performance we can't create on our own. Let's get to this transaction, this
Yeah.
opportunity for you to level up what it is you had as a vision for the company.
Yeah.
How did you meet uh, the team over
Yeah.
at T72, and what did that look like, and what was your
Yeah.
intention behind the deal?
Yeah, so let me fill in a gap real quick of a couple of years. So in 2019, once we pivoted to Nicolytics, we started to aggregate rideshare drivers, Uber, Lyft, Instacart, created a mobile app, started to do stuff on the analytics side, and then started with smaller businesses and then grew to larger businesses. And then, over a period of, 8 months of consecutive growth minus one, that being COVID, hard to sell out of home ads when everyone's locked at home. Got into some nice accelerators like Techstars. And yeah, we kind of got to a point to where it was interesting, right? Because we were solving two problems. We're helping mobility companies and drivers get to profitability because that was a big thing. And then the other one was the main one was solving for out of home advertising and the challenges that it faced when it comes to the measurability, right? Billboards work, you just don't necessarily know
Ad
how
spend ad spend attribution, right? It's a it's
that's
a,
what
it's
it
a
was, right? And so
challenging.
we got to a point, right? And again, now going through that kind of first notion of where we almost went to zero, right? We were a month away from going to zero. Of course, there would have been lessons learned, and that's valuable. But again, it's like I don't want to let that happen. And so, really taking a more calculated approach to focusing on solid profit and unit economics. So we did that, I think, pretty disciplined, and we got to a point to where we hit profitability, and then we had, over like the $1 million mark of MRR. So it's really important to set yourself up to have options, right? Because a lot of times, if you're just going down one path, that limits where that path's going to come. So I ended up meeting an investment group, holding company slash like just a group of really good operators, right? I mean, these are people who have literally founded companies from idea and sold them for hundreds of millions of dollars to publicly traded companies. And I wasn't necessarily like sure what we were looking to do at first. It was more about having the conversation around knowing that, hey, we're onto something, there's something good here, but how do we really reach that venture scale and that global opportunity that I still feel the business could get to, but what the market could support. And so met them, and we just started having conversations, and it was really important to have similar approaches into how we looked at growth, right? So it was, okay, we want to grow this, but we don't want to grow at all costs, right? We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be like, like a path towards profitability. And yeah, I mean, those conversations just kind of started happening, and it made sense to actually do a pure acquisition. And so, and I would say,
Unpack that because you were thinking you were on the path to venture capital and investment into the business, and then you're having this discussion. You're getting great alignment.
yeah.
You're getting an agreement on how to approach the future of the business potentially together, and it evolves to, hey, this is an actual deal, is an acquisition of the company versus just simply funding it.
Yeah, exactly. We had raised some capital before Nicolytics as well. And so, had gone down that path and had some success. But yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of times when we're, starting out, right, as especially in the pure like technology startup space, you're thinking that this is going to be a $1 billion company and it's just going to be smooth sailing. Then you start to realize that like even those overnight successes, there were so much that happened and so many different players that helped support the business at different times to help move that needle forward. I mean, there's certain things that you can't take away from, that's going to be similar in those. But yeah, I mean, it just made a lot of sense. And really what it allowed us to do was compound all of their knowledge that they've brought from, the 20 some years plus running startups, investing in 50 different startups. And my boss now, he did over $5 billion worth of mergers and acquisitions at his previous role. Was like, hey, these are the people I want to work with. Like, we can have an aligned goal and actually still grow the business that was essentially, my baby, for lack of better terminology. And these are the people you want on your team, right? And so, yeah, like, it's okay to share, right? I think that's one thing too, where startup founders can get caught up where they don't want, they want the whole pie. And it's like, if your pie is like, you know, very small, that's not going to fill you up very much. But if you have a very large pie and you have a decent slither of it, like you and your whole family can eat, right? So to me, it was that, but at the end of the day, it was also like, oh, these are good humans. Like, because I think, I've had enough experience to where, um, you just realize it's just not worth taking money from people who are not good humans, or at least don't have the, the skill set to communicate that they're good humans and stuff. Just because it's, I always told people like we're not like like saving lives here. We're selling advertising, right? So it's not take ourselves too seriously. And all joking aside, like it obviously is serious because there's money involved, but at the end of the day, you can win and you can have fun doing it. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be periods of intensity and accountability and responsibility. I mean, absolutely. But you also really want to think about what that long-term partnership is. And that's kind of what they sold me. But at the end of the day, 6 months later, that's actually what's happened. These are my friends as well as they are, technically my bosses.
which is good. You were thrown into the lion's den, right? I think uh, the holding company, or at least the people involved, have done over 150 acquisitions.
Yep.
So they have a little bit of experience over you in
Oh,
these talks. Explain what that felt like.
yeah. I mean, it was, and again, I can only speak to my experience. And I think I truly am fortunate in the experience that, you know, the the two main deal makers had alignment. So we would get on a call, we would have a conversation, and everything was great. And we were like, oh, perfect. Yeah, this. And I'm like, man, this is like a pretty relaxed negotiation, right? Obviously, would there be trade-offs? But then it's like the attorneys get involved, and you just come back a week later, and you're like, no, 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 this is not at all what we discussed. And so, and again, I really don't think there was anyone trying to pull one over on each other, but you have to understand the roles that different people play in their particular team, right? And the attorney's jobs are to do exactly that. My attorney was to protect my and Nicolytic's vested interest, and their job was to protect their vested interest. And there was a disconnect. And so there was a lot of I would say uncertainty and a lot of I would say like scared maybe is a little strong of an emotion, but definitely a sense of like cloud nine and then being like, oh God, this deal's dead. Because like something would come back from the attorney and they'd be like, and you see it's like, oh my gosh, this is a deal breaker. But then again, then you get back on the call and you kind of figure out. And so like it really was like a very like stressful, high cortisol producing period of time because it was almost like every other day, you're like, this deal's dead. All this deal's like, oh, we're back on. All this deal's dead. Oh, we're back on. And it's not, again, I like hindsight's 2020. You just realize like those are just attorneys like bluffing and kind of calling each other out. And, as long as you don't lose sight of like the two decision makers in the business team are the ones that are truly, hiring the attorneys, the deal will get done. It's just not going to be quick, and obviously, they're there for a reason. You learn to appreciate it too, because, you don't, you know, like that's not what unless you study mergers and acquisitions, you're not the one that, and deep into the weeds with some of the
Or
minutia.
the Latin that's being used in these meetings. Yeah, the job of the attorneys are to represent their clients and get them the best possible deal they can that protects their interest.
Yeah.
And you're negotiating present value, right? A transaction amount for future expectations, what you're going to build together. And that's a guess, right? So future is unknown. It's your enthusiasm for the collaboration on the business side that will dictate whether or not this deal is successful for you, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. And I also think there's a few things there to unpack that, like, really looking back at that moment is like you have to think about it from both sides of the angle, right? As a founder, you probably are looking through rosy gold lens. I butchered that, but you get the analogy, I believe. And they're looking at it from a different level. They're looking at, the P&L, the 36 months of trailing revenue, what's your churn rate? And you're like, yeah, 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 that's all there. But like, listen to this. And so like, there's this understanding of what you think the value of the business is, and then what the actual value of the business is. And then it's like about negotiating what that growth looks like. And you need to have a realistic understanding that like there are just core principles that drive deals that are going to get done. Like, yes, a relationship is important, but at the end of the day, just having a relationship, you're not going to get acquired, at least acquired in a way that's going to have any substantial like dividend on your life. And that's another thing too, I realized with attorneys is that your understanding of what you could get off the call and there could be two different understandings. Like what they heard is a lot different than what you heard. And then you kind of have selective hearing on things and you're like, wait a second. And so it just is a slow process and it's a tedious process. And it's the one that requires red line after red line after red line after red line after red line because you don't want to screw this stuff up, right? And that's what they're paid, the $300 to $500 an hour to do is to not screw it up. And so, yeah. And as an entrepreneur, you just want to you want to move fast, right? You're like, let's go, we got this. But it is not a fast process. It is not a fast process. And then on top of that, you're running your business, right? So it's like, okay, now if my business goes like really down, they're going to leverage that to say, oh, wait, you're actually worth X amount as opposed to this. So it is, I think something you need to be very intentional about. And you also like either need to be in or you need to be out, right? You either like are deciding, okay, I'm committing to this up until a point, right? Don't do it if the deal turns sour and the deal doesn't make sense, don't be afraid to walk away. But like if everything's going kind of as planned, um, you need to be like in a mental state of saying like, okay, I'm going to ride this out and we're going to do whatever it takes to get this done. And it's just, yeah, it's a process and it's tedious and, a lot of late night calls and stress, but it can be done. And, hopefully, you know, um, it's something that, let's just say, hopefully you listen to this podcast before you do it. Cause I did it and now I wish I would have, would have helped a
Uh,
lot.
you highlighted something. To get deals done, the business side of the deal are the folks who get it done.
Yeah.
Not the accountants, the lawyers. It's the business side coming back, having conversations, and working through the questions and the uncertainty to get it done. So there has to be a commitment on the business side. And most of the challenge or the delays are going to be coming from the other experts, the consultants, the lawyers, attorneys who are coming involved to try to protect the companies in this decision. How long, just give us a time frame. How long did it take? How long were you distracted by this process?
You can, it actually shows quite interestingly on our sales numbers. It's like, oh, that's when the transition started, or the serious conversations. And so, as a CEO, there's this analogy or founder, especially in the tech space, like you're always fundraising, right? So even if you're not raising around, you're still fielding conversations because you get inquiries and it's good to build relationships because you don't want to the first time you meet someone, you don't ask them for money, right? Usually that does not work out well. At least in my experience. And so that process of like having conversations wasn't a big deal. It was kind of part of the, I would say, monthly process of my work. But then once it started heating up, I'm trying to think of the exact timeline. I want to say it was like I think we had the LOI signed in November. Could be wrong. November, December. And then we had the completed acquisition official at like May, June. So I want to say 5 or 6 months.
Can you take us back to that time when you actually had the LOI you were ready to sign? What were you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it was wild, right? Because you, I think you have all these preconceived notions when you start about, and to be honest, like it's totally different now. And I recently read a book, it's actually from a a company we partner with, um, that's all about like exiting and kind of under like how that should be one of the first things you set up and think about. But I never really did that, right? It was like kind of like you just I don't know what it is. It feels like it's taboo to talk about exiting and startups. Like you're just gonna grow and grow. But the reality is like, 90% of them are not gonna succeed. And getting acquired isn't even necessarily just I mean, it is an exit, right? It's recapitalization, and it was a mix of equity as well as cash. There's a lot of different ways of structuring it. Um, but when I got the LOI, I mean, it was one of the few times where like you just truly like like there's a lot of highs and lows in startup life. I was truly one of the highs because it was like, all right, like this actually is happening. But I also was very like I've done enough transactions, not with acquisitions, but just in large deals and getting commits from VCs or whatever it might be in different deals where you don't, you're not celebrating to that ink's dry and that, paper the wire hits, so to speak. So I was very happy. I was very excited. I think I celebrated that weekend. And then it was just right back to work on Monday because I knew we had a lot of work to do.
And then for definitive docs, so the final deal package, attorneys release signatures if done virtually or in person,
Yeah.
signing of the final deal docs with the purchase price and the considerations inked.
Yep.
What did that look like for you?
I said, all right, I need 2 weeks off. That's literally the first thing I told them. I told them that during the negotiation. I said, oh, I'm going to take 2 weeks off because I was burnt. Like I was burnt to a crisp, like mentally. Because again, it was you're running two businesses at once. You're running this very, I would say, relatively complex transaction. You're also too, which was promising. We started like planning strategically, like what was next for the business. So that's where I felt like that trust was building, right? Because I'm like, okay, well, they're not going to be wasting. These guys are high caliber, very successful individual. They're not going to be wasting their time, like, planning out the calendar year with me in terms of like goals and stuff. If this wasn't serious, which is another just thing, right? If it doesn't feel right, I mean, and the pulse isn't there, obviously, you're kind of still courting during the entire process. But yeah, I mean, once that was done, I was very proud. I mean, I was proud. I mean, there is again, like I failed a lot in business. I've had a lot of failures, but that was one thing that I felt like no matter what happens from here on out, you cannot take this away from me. I sold a company successfully to a very respectable firm. And so, yeah, I was proud. But then again, I was like, my emotions were so like torched that I was just like, guys, I need 2 weeks off. And they're like, yep, we got you.
Amazing. You highlighted it in line throughout the interview here of what you learned. But if you were to summarize it, uh, go back in time, talk to that Judah who was starting this conversation here. Um, what are the immediate tips you want to make sure you have before you started this exit process?
Yeah, I think first of all, knowing that it's gonna suck um is like the first step. Just like understanding it, right? It's not a fun process. There's nothing fun about it. Until it's finished, that's fun. But it is like, I mean, you're literally digging up your skeletons, you're going through financials, you're chasing employees that need to have signed NDAs and stuff. And so, that's just the reality of it, right? And that's just the kind of the part of the process that's just like very very dry, so to speak. That's a big one. I think mentally just prep for that. I think the other thing of it is too is do not get too emotionally involved into the day to day, right? So just kind of let it ride out. Let the attorneys really do their thing because I promise you they're not actually stressing. They're just coolly, calmly, negotiating in a very hard to decode way. And then you know I got forced to do this just because I've had burnout in the past, and so like thankfully I had this kind of incorporated into my routine already. Was like taking steps away when you can to just shut off business and unplug and go to nature and do different things. Look, my wife lived to travel, so did a little bit of traveling during that time, even if it was for a weekend or something. So that helped. And then also too, don't neglect your business, because at the end of the day, sure, you have the relationship, but they're buying your business, right? If there's not the business, there won't be a deal. And a lot of times I think entrepreneurs can neglect that. And then by the time the deal gets there, they're like looking like what's left. And there's just a lot less value. And so thankfully we were able to actually do some really cool, exciting things while we were there. And part of it was also the team we had in place, right? Like understanding that, like, hey guys, like we need to kind of kick ass right now or continue to. I'm not going to be here as much as I typically am. These are the process, tell those that need to know, maybe not tell everyone that doesn't need to know, because it's not everyone's business. And so, and then at the end of the day, the most important thing is just focus on like things you can't control, and like and let go of the things you can't control. Right. So if there's things that are like messed up, like, and you can't control it, then it is what it is. If there's things that you can't control, focus on that. Other than that, uh, the cars will fall as they may.
Judah, sage advice. I appreciate you coming on and joining and sharing the story. If someone wants to connect with you, how's the best ways to reach out?
I'm asking my business. I'm sitting on a beach unplugged. What are you talking about? You got to send a pigeon carrier. I'm teasing. No, reach out via LinkedIn. You can search my name, Judah Longgrear. I'm sure it'll pop up. There's not too many Judahs that I've met, at least. Facebook, I'm not on, but our business is. And yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best one. Or email, you can email me at judah@nicolytics.com, and happy to, give you any other advice I can. And I think you also have to appreciate that each deal is a bit unique. And so, just having a resource like yours that gives us so much general yet specific pieces of insights. I think the insights are the things, right? Because the situations are going to all differ, but at the end of the day, a lot of those core insights are what do translate, um, you know, from deal to deal.
Wonderful. Judah, appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure being here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Agency Acquisitions and Exits. You can find us on Spotify or on YouTube. Click that like button and subscribe. We post stories from industry experts, from founders who sold or acquired agencies. If you or someone you know should be on the show to talk about their journey, let us know in the comments. We'd love to talk to you. As always, thank you for listening. We appreciate you. Stay safe.